Hello class, once again it's Mr. Kaplan and I'm here to present the fifth lesson in chapter 6 that is going to deal with finding the equation of a line. Yes, finding the equation of a line again, but this time we're going to see how we can find the equation of a line when we're given a slope and one other point. So up until now, what we have done is find the equation of a line when we have a slope and a y-intercept. So now what we're going to now outline the steps that we need to do in order to find the equation of a line when we have a slope and a coordinate or ordered pair. So let's jump right to it right now. Now you're going to see when we're coming up with equations of lines, okay? And even if you backtrack to all of the examples we've looked at up until this point, okay, we have always followed the same basic three steps: determine or find the slope, okay, find the y-intercept, and come up with the equation of a line. This lesson will be no different. The only difference in this case here is we're now taking the difficulty level up just a tad bit over here. All right, so again, anytime you're coming up with the equation of a line, you always have to remember that all equations of lines, when we're expressing it as a certain form, will always be the slope and the y-intercept. That's why, again, I'm gonna present to you a set of instructions. It's actually going to be the same set of instructions we're going to see for all the examples dealing with equations of lines here. So when you're coming up with the equation of a line, the very first thing that you must always do is to solve for the slope or find the slope. Now, once you find the slope, or if it's given to you, you replace that for the letter m. So that's step number one. Now, step number two, okay, up until now, we've just been looking at where the graph touches the y-axis to determine the y-intercept. The difference is in today's lesson, we're now going to be given an ordered pair where we actually have to substitute the x and the y into the equation and then do the last step, which is solving for b algebraically. Okay, so that's why, as I said before, we're now still doing the same thing, okay, but now increasing the difficulty level of the steps that are required. Now, once we have the slope of the y-intercept, okay, you put it back to the equation y equals mx plus b, and that will be the equation of the line that we're being asked to solve for. All right, so let's take a look at some numbers and get right to it over here. So it says for each of the following, find the equation of the line and graph the line using the y-intercept and the point that's given in the question. All right, so it says find the equation of the line that has a slope of 3 and passes to the point 9, 4. Now, if you take a look at the right side there, okay, are the basic steps that we're going to follow in order for us to solve this. And as I said before, the three basic steps: finding the slope, finding the y-intercept, and finding the equation of the line, okay, are always going to be in play, okay, just using different steps to solve for it. All right, so step number one over here, okay, write down the equation y equals mx plus b, okay? Always start off with that. And the reason for that is because as long as you have that written down, once you read the rest of the question, you'll see exactly where the numbers need to go. So when you read the question again, okay, it gives us here a slope of 3. So what you need to do there is you need to take that 3 and then replace it in for the m. So that's step number one. Now, as you go through this, okay, make sure you are doing this step by step, okay, and you're not skipping any of the steps, because when you do that, that's when the mistakes start to happen, all right? Now, we've taken care of the slope, so we don't need to worry about it anymore. So we now need to take a look at the next piece of information. So step number two, what we want to do now is to substitute the coordinates of the given point for x and y. Now remember that anytime you're given an ordered pair, the first number is always going to be the x, okay, and the second number is always going to be the y. So in this case over here, what we are going to have here is going to be the 9, which is going to replace the x, okay, and the 4, which is going to replace the y. Now you notice I've highlighted the letters that we're going to substitute here just so you can see exactly where the numbers are going to go. Now the point is always going to be x and y. So you're going to see in the next step here, when I replace the 4 in for the y, it's going to go on the left side, and the x here is going to be replaced with a 9 with brackets around it. Now notice that once you substitute the values in for the letters, the only letter remaining is the b, which happens to be on the right side. Okay, so let's simplify the rest here. So I'm going to take the 3 and the 9, multiply them together to give me 27. Okay, now last but not least here, what we want to do here is to isolate the b. So remember that when you're isolating letters, it doesn't matter where the letter is. So for this one over here, just remember you're going to keep this B, okay, exactly where it is. That's not going to move. So with that said here, what does need to move is this 27. And when it goes to the other side of the equal sign, you're now going to subtract it from the 4 that's already there. Okay, so again, just to talking about form, make sure that when you take the number and then it goes to the other side of the equal sign, that you write it after the number that was already there. All right, and then 4 minus 27, that's going to give me negative 23. All right. Now, just to double check here, we have our slope of 3, which we put in. Now we have our y-intercept. So last but not least, we just need to finish this question here by replacing the b of negative 23 into the b in the equation. All right, and that's it. So the equation of this line will be y equals 3x plus negative 23, which then can be simplified to y equals 3x minus 23. Okay, that's pretty much it. So notice the 3 steps are exactly the same over here, and I have boxes around them. So step number 1, okay, we put in the slope in for the m. Step number 2, we had to solve for the y-intercept using some algebra. And last but not least here, what we had to do here was to replace the b in for the b in the equation, and then we got the equation for this particular line. Now, this next thing what we're going to do here, we're just going to graph this line, just another method that we're going to look at here. And it tells us here to use the y-intercept and the given point. So we're going to do exactly that. So you can see here that the y-intercept, that's going to be the negative 23. So let's plot the y-intercept here of negative 23, okay? And then we have another point over here. It's actually right there, the 9 and the 4. So let's plot that. Okay, so remember what we have here for 9 and 4, we're going to go right 9 and then up 4, okay, which is up there. And don't forget, connect that with a straight line there, okay? So again, just to, as you're writing this down over here, make sure that, again, the same steps are exactly the same. We found the slope, replace the m, solve for the y-intercept, come up with the equation of the line. Okay, and again, this is just another way to graph a line using only 2 points. And in this case here, we actually had the 2 points of the question, which were the y-intercept and the given point. All right, let's take a look at another one here. So this time it says find the equation of a line that has a slope of negative 1 over 2 and passes through the point 4, 1. Now again, anytime you hear equation here or C, okay, equation of a line, okay, always make sure the first thing that you need to write down here is y equals mx plus b. Okay, whatever you do, that's the first thing that you must do, okay? Now, once you do that, take a look at the rest of the question and see what pieces of information you have. So you notice as you read this question, we are given a slope here of negative 1 over 2. So remember that when this, once you're given the slope, that goes in for the m. Okay, so that's our sub step, and that's our first step, is just replacing the slope there with the m. Now, the next thing we're going to do here, we need to replace the 0.41 for x and y in this formula or equation over here. So the 4 here is going to be the x, and the 1 here is going to be the y, okay? Now you can see that once we replace the x and the y with the 4 and the 1 respectively, we now have the b on its own. So the last step here, we just need to simplify accordingly. Now again, this negative 1/2 and times 4 here, if you simplify that with your calculator, okay, you'll wind up getting negative 2. And for the last step here, don't forget you always leave the b exactly where it is. So all we need to do here is take this negative 2, okay, goes to the other side of the equal sign, and then add itself to the 1. So what we have there will be a b value here of 3. And last but not least, to come up with the equation of the line, just remember that the 3 goes in for the b. So the equation of this particular line will be y equals negative 1 over 2x plus 3. All right, so let's graph this thing here. Now remember that we have 2 points to draw our line over here, starting off with the y-intercept of 3 over here, the b equals 3. So from the center, we're going to go up 3. Okay, and our other point here is the 4, 1. So from the center, we're going to go right 4 and then up 1. Okay, and then connect that with a straight line. All right, so again, you've seen 2 different examples. Again, all you had to do again was to replace the slope, and the slope was given to you, and then substitute the ordered pair or the coordinate for x and y. And just remember that when you're given a point, the first number is always the x and the second number is always the y. Now again, the difference that we've seen in the last 2 examples is that we had to solve for the b instead of just looking at the graph there. All right. Okay, let's proceed over here. So for this one now, we're now going to factor in what we did with the last lesson dealing with parallel and perpendicular lines. So it says find the equation of a line that is parallel to y equals 2x minus 1 and passes at the point 313. Now going back to the title of this chapter, remember this is what's called analytic geometry. So we do need to analyze exactly what we have in this particular question. Now, if there's one word that stands out over here, okay, I hope you can see I bolded it for a reason, and it's the word parallel. Because remember when we're looking at lines that are parallel to each other, okay, they're always going to have the same slope. So again, we're going to approach this exact same way using 3 basic steps of finding the slope, okay, finding the y-intercept, and coming up with the equation of the line. But notice that this one here does require some extra thinking here, all right? So step number 1, what we want to do here is determine the slope of the new line. And whatever that is, we have to substitute it for m in y equals mx plus b. So remember when you have lines that are parallel, they have to have the exact same slope. So if you look at the original line over here, our slope here is going to be 2. Okay? And the reason for that is because they have the same slope. Okay? So right now, all we know is that this brand new line is going to have an m value of 2. Okay? So that's step number 1. Notice this is the exact same step, just a little bit turned up a notch in order to give it a little bit more difficulty here. All right? Okay, so that's step number 1. So step number 2, again, we need to find the y-intercept. Okay, and this time what we want to do here is to substitute the x and the y into this equation with the dotted red box here. So we have a point here of 313. Okay, and the 3 is going to go in for the x. Okay, and the 13 is going to go in for the y there. Now, when you do this step here, make sure you do it after you substitute the slope, because again, if you try to do everything at once, again, the numbers will get jumbled all over the place here. All right. So that will give us 13 for the y, and then the x will be replaced with 3 in brackets. Okay, and then we just need to solve from here. So in the next step, 2 times 3 gives me 6. And last but not least, we're going to leave the b where it is. So we're going to take this 6 and then move it to the other side and subtract it from the 13 that's already there. And that's going to give us a y-intercept here of 7. Okay, so we have our slope, which was 2. We now have our y-intercept, so we can now finish this question by coming up with the equation here. So the equation of a line that is parallel to y equals 2x minus 1, okay, but passes through this point is going to have an equation of y equals 2x plus 7. Now, just to compare the answer, okay, to the original question over here, notice that both equations have the same slope, which in this case there's 2, and what makes them different is the y-intercept. So if we were to draw this, we would have 2 lines that would be that would never meet, and they would just cross the y-intercepts at different parts. All right. Okay, let's take a look at this next one over here. Okay, so same approach, obviously a different question with one slight twist to it. So this time we want to find the equation of a line that is perpendicular to y equals 3x plus 1 and passes the point 6, 2. All right, so again, step number 1, what we want to do here is to find the slope of the new line, and whatever that is, that's what's going to go in for the m. Now, the key word here is perpendicular, okay? So remember from the last lesson, anytime you have lines that are perpendicular to each other, their slopes are negative reciprocals, all right? So if you take a look at the original equation here, our slope here is going to be 3. So when you take the 3, okay, what you have to do with this 3 is to find the negative reciprocal of it, okay? Now remember the way we do that is by taking the number, and remember there was an imaginary 1 underneath it, okay? Remember you switch the numerator and denominator. I just say flip it because it's a faster way to say it, okay? And then you change it to the opposite sign. So when I flip the 3, our new fraction will be 1 over 3, and then when you change the sign, it becomes negative 1 over 3, all right? So what do we do from here? This negative 1 over 3, which is the negative reciprocal of 3, that's going to be the brand new slope of the line that we need to solve for. So if you take a look at this negative 1 over 3, that's what's going to go in for this m. So right now we have an equation of y equals negative 1 over 3x plus b, okay? Now, the next step is exactly the same thing as we did in the last one. So we're going to solve for the y-intercept b, okay, by substituting 6 and 2 for x and y. Okay, so notice all I've done here is I've taken the x of 6, replace it in for the x, and the 2 here is going to replace the y. Okay, now if you take the negative 1 over 3 and you multiply it to 6, that's going to give you negative 2 over here. All right, so if you have your fraction key, if you put negative 1, fraction key 3, and in brackets 6, you will get negative 2 as your resulting answer there. All right, and last but not least, leave the b where it is, take the negative 2, move to the other side, and add to the 2 that's already there. So the y-intercept in this case here is going to be 4. All right, so in terms of the solving for the y-intercept, okay, and as well as the slope, okay, we've pretty much done all the algebraic stuff. So last but not least, we need to come up with the equation of that line. So all we're going to do with that 4 is replace it in for the b. So the equation of the line that is perpendicular to y equals 3x plus 1 and passes through the point 6.2 is going to be y equals negative 1 over 3x plus 4. All right. Now, like I said, it's very important that you read this question very, very carefully and see what the key words are, because the key words determine what the next plan is to figure out what your answer should be. So notice in this question over here, I bolded perpendicular just as a quick reminder that the slope of a perpendicular line is always going to be the negative reciprocal of the given equation here. All right, let's finish this off today's lesson here with a word problem here. So we're going to talk about traveling. Now, going back to word problems and what we have to do for this one, you're going to see that this question is going to give us a piece of information, and we're going to take that piece of information and come up with the equation that's going to help us solve the remainder of this problem. So, Giancarlo used the airline JetSet to fly to New York. The airline charges $25 for each piece of checked-in baggage. It tells us here Giancarlo's checked in 3 pieces of luggage, and the total price of his airfare was $425. However, he did not know the set price of the ticket. Whew. All right, so what we want to do here first is to set up the equation based on the information that's given to us and take the word problem and see exactly where it's going to go into the equation. So it says using the equation P is equal to MC plus T. It tells us here that P represents the total price, C represents the number of pieces of luggage, and T represents the ticket price, and that's in this equation over here. Okay, what we want to do here is to use the information provided to figure out how much the price of the ticket will be. All right. Now, some of you will approach this in a different order. Some of you will probably look at the equation first and figure out what letter this question is asking me to solve for. Okay, and that's a great way to approach this problem. Another way to approach this problem is to take the first paragraph and see where those numbers go into the equation P is equal to MC plus T. And that's exactly how we're going to do it, because you will see right away what letter is going to be remaining on its own. Okay, so what we have here, starting off with $25 for each piece of checked-in baggage. All right, so let's see what the letters here are here again. We know that P represents the total price, C represents the number of pieces of luggage, and T represents ticket price. Now, for this one over here, okay, the $25 is for each piece of checked-in baggage. So another way to interpret that is that for every piece of checked-in baggage that is checked in, okay, they are going to be this person is going to be charged $25 for each piece. Well, we do know C represents the number of pieces of luggage. So this 25 is the cost for each amount of C. Okay, so this 25 here is going to replace the letter M. Okay, so let's highlight that. Okay, and the reason for that is because you're basically another way to look at this is 25 times C, because C again was the number of pieces of luggage, or $25 per piece of luggage. All right, next one. Giancarlo checked in 3 pieces of luggage. So this one over here, it tells us that he is putting in 3 pieces. So it tells us here in the question that C represents the number of pieces of luggage. So this 3 is going to go in for the C. Okay, highlight that. All right, last number that we have here, we found out that his total price of the ticket was $425. So if you read the rest of the question, it tells us here that P represents the total price. So this 425 is going to go in for the P. Now you notice I've highlighted the letters here just to show you where the numbers are going to go. And you notice the one letter that is not highlighted, okay, is going to be what we're solving for. And sure enough, if you read the question, it tells us that T represents the ticket price, okay? So let's put the numbers in here and let's solve. So we have 425 equals 25 times 3, gives me 75. And for the last step here, we're going to leave the T where it is because that's what we want to solve for. So we're going to take the 75, subtract it from the 425. So the price of the ticket is going to be $350. All right. So like I said, notice how we took a word problem. Okay. We were given an equation to work with, and all we had to do is to figure out where the numbers are going to go. That's why it's very important that you, for any, when you're reading word problem and you see anything with a number, make a note of it and see what exactly that number represents. Okay, so in this case over here, we had to think it through in terms of where the different numbers went into the formula, because we had 4 letters to choose from, and we had to have at least 3 in order for us to solve this problem. All right. Now for part B, it says, what is the equation that models this relationship? Now remember that equations are always given in the form of y equals mx plus b, and your the last set of examples, equations, all you have to do there was replace the m and the b. Now, if you line up y equals mx plus b here, I'm just going to try and type it in neatly here. If we want y, okay, is equal to mx plus b, okay, you're going to see which letters line up with what. So remember that when you're coming up with equations, you only need to replace the m and the b. So what that means for this one over here, or again, you approach it the exact same way. Okay, all we're going to do here is replace the m and the t. So remember that the m here was the 25, and the t here was the 350. So the equation for that models this particular scenario will be p is equal to 25c plus 350. Okay, so again, that's just going back to analytic geometries, understanding what each number represents when you're trying to putting it back into an equation in the form of y equals mx plus b. All right, so now that we have an equation, let's use it to answer the next question here. And what we want to do here is to graph this using what we have on the screen here. So what we're going to do here, we're going to use the piece of information that we did, like we did in the last set of examples, where we had a y-intercept and one other point. So I'll start off with the y-intercept. Now for this one over here, just keep in mind that we are dealing with price and luggage. So if you take a look at p is equal to m 25c plus 350, okay, the number of luggage will be on the horizontal axis, and the price will be on the vertical axis there. All right. So our very first step is to plot the vertical intercept. Now, the vertical intercept is just a fancy word for the y-intercept here. Now, remember the y-intercept, okay, would be the value for the b, which is always a number here. So if you look at the equation, that will be the 350. So plot that first. Okay. Now, when you plot the second point, you're probably wondering, well, do we have to use the rise over run for this one? You could, but it'd probably be more difficult of the option over here. So we actually have another piece of information, and you probably don't see it right away because it's not expressed as an ordered pair, but we will make it and express it as an ordered pair. Okay, and that is dealing with this piece of information here. Now it tells us here that 3 pieces, okay, the total there was $425. Okay. And that included the price of the ticket there. So what that means here is that we can plot the point 3 and 425. Okay, and that's right there. And remember that to draw a line, all you need is 2 points, and then connect those 2 straight through. Now for this example, again, make sure that you draw a line that extends here, because we will be using it in the next slide over here. So it says here, determine the total price of his airfare if Giancarlo checks in 5 pieces of luggage. Okay, and we're going to solve it using the equation, but we're also going to check it on the line by using interpolation or extrapolation. We'll figure it out once we answer the question first. All right. So always start off by writing down the equation, and all we're going to do here is that since he's checking in 5 pieces of luggage, we're going to substitute 5 in for C, and you plug that in. That's going to give me $475. All right. Now, just to double check here, since we are looking at 5 pieces of luggage. Okay, remember that 5 pieces of luggage is now beyond the data that's given to us. We are performing extrapolation for this one. So when we read off the graph, you notice that we do wind up getting a value that is going to be 475. And that wraps up lesson 6.5 here. So again, start working through your review package there and make sure you're checking up your answers accordingly. And in the next lesson, we'll be looking at finding the equation of a line given 2 points. And guess what? We're going to, for the first time, look at a question without a graph. Oh no. All right, until the next lesson, I will see you.